we have already a pretty large turnout, so I wanted to welcome Nenad Stojanović to give a talk at our, I think, last but one departmental seminar. Nenad is a professor at the University of Geneva, and he's going to give a talk about discrimination against minority candidates. So we are looking forward to your talk, and usually we have a 45 minutes talk followed by a Q&A, and we'll moderate that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabor. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks for the invitation. I was so much happy when we were planning to do this in presence as an in-presence event, and the train tickets were already bought and everything, and yeah, unfortunately it will be not in presence, but still I hope that the online event as a webinar will be interesting to you as well. So let me now just try to share my screen. Okay, my talk will be on the topic of electoral discrimination, discrimination against candidates belonging to minority groups. Just to start with some context first, in many, especially Western democracies, we have a growing number of citizens who have the so-called migrant background. And these citizens, if they have acquired citizenship in the respective countries, of course, enjoy the right to vote and the right to run for office. So these are the two core democratic rights, and sometimes they can clash. Let's say if the right to vote for anyone you want undermines the right to run for office that we have as citizens. At the same time, we can see in the past years a growing number of studies focusing on descriptive underrepresentation of certain minorities, also of immigrant-origin minorities, not only of immigrant-origin minorities. Think only on studies on descriptive representation of women, but again, there are a lot of studies on immigrant-origin minorities, and that will be the focus of my presentation as well. There are many possible explanations why certain groups are underrepresented in parliament, especially. Here, the focus is on the thesis that the so-called electoral discrimination might be at least one possible explanation of this underrepresentation. And by electoral discrimination, I mean that there are some voters who tend to discriminate against minority candidates. In the past years, there have been more studies on this, especially in the American context. Scholars exploring the discrimination against especially African American candidates from white majority candidates. But similar studies in Europe are much more recent. The study that I will present here, it is co-authored with Leah Portman. It was a 3-year research project funded by Swiss National Foundation. And in that research project, we focus our empirical study on the case of Switzerland. So why a study on Switzerland? Well, there are at least two reasons why the Swiss case is particularly interesting. So if our focus are immigrant origin minorities, you can find here on the slide some numbers on the percentage of immigrant origin people in Switzerland, both if you consider the whole population, given that 25%, 1 out of 4, are foreign residents without Swiss citizenship. But even if you focus on the remaining 75% who do have voting rights, if they are 18 or above, there are estimations that 1 out of 5, more or less, have a migrant background. The second reason is that there are some peculiar elements of the Swiss voting system that make that studying electoral discrimination in Switzerland is particularly inviting for us political scientists. So here you just see some numbers on the origin of naturalized Swiss citizens, so people who are Swiss citizens, but who at the beginning, when they were born, were not citizens. So you see that from figures from 1991 until 2015, that about 1 out of 4 are originally from former Yugoslavia, followed by Italy, Turkey, Germany, Portugal, and all others that you can see here, just to give you a broad picture about the possible origins of people with migration background, even though the official definition of somebody who has a migration background does not include necessarily that they must be naturalized Swiss citizens. You can also be of migrant background if you were born as Swiss citizens, but both of your parents were born outside of Switzerland and did not have Swiss citizenship at their birth, etc. I don't want to go now into details, but we would be happy to provide more information during the Q&A. So yes, I was saying that there are some peculiarities of the Swiss electoral system that make it particularly interesting for studying electoral discrimination. So I will say now something more about these peculiarities. The Swiss electoral system belongs to the group of list proportional representation systems. Within that group, it's an open list system, so you can allocate, you don't vote only for a list like in a closed list system, but you can also allocate preferential votes to candidates. But within that open list PR system, the Swiss system is the so-called free list, because you can allocate preferential votes not only to candidates from your own party list, but also from other party lists. And this is the first peculiarity, which, as far as I know, exists in Luxembourg. I'm not aware. There are probably also other countries, but Luxembourg is in Western Europe also the one. And we call these votes positive preference votes. In the Swiss system, voters can award a candidate also with an additional preferential vote. So you can give like 2 preferential votes to each candidate. But the true peculiarity of the Swiss system is number 3, giving voters the possibility to cross off candidates on the list that they have chosen. So they cannot cross off candidates from other lists. But if you vote like for a liberal party, let's say, you can cross off candidates from that party. And we call these votes negative preference votes. So that's why I wrote a little bit provocatively that Switzerland is a potential paradise for racist voters, because you just cross off those who you do not like, including if you don't like them because of their color of their skin or their name or their ethnic origin. Not every Swiss voter would necessarily use these options they have. You can also simply take, vote for any list without giving any preferential votes to any candidate. But approximately 1 out of 2 Swiss voters do use these options, so they do modify their ballots according to the options that I just presented. So to give you a concrete example, what we did in our study is we really went to see we wanted to see the real ballots. It was a little bit, a challenge to get access to all of this, and later on we received information in an electronic form, so we didn't have to code by hand and to photograph a single ballot, but we did that in our very, very first pilot that we did at municipal elections in the canton of Zurich before the big study we did on national level. And here you see one ballot from one municipality where we really photograph the ballot. And you see here the candidates. These are the candidates of the Social Democratic Party. And you see many people, some people, have some, let's say, Swiss names, other not. But among those who do not have a typical Swiss name, you see 2 names probably originally from former Yugoslavia, Dragana Dimitrijević, Željko Vuksanović. So here you see really a voter who crossed off these 2 names that clearly have origin from the former Yugoslavia. This voter did not cross other names that also would apply as non-Swiss. This one is of Polish origin, but actually this one is a name that is in this given municipality very well known because it's been there for 80 years. So it's a question, whether or not you consider it as a typical, for our purposes, immigrant origin name. But we can discuss about this later on. So this is one example of, what do we have in mind? Of course, we have no idea about the motives and who this voter is, apart from the fact that it is a voter who chose the Social Democratic Party, not another party. And here is another ballot, the same municipality, the same party, but here you see that the voter crossed off exactly the same 2 candidates as before as the other voter, but this voter put another candidate from the same party. So you really write down by hand. So this voter decided to give an additional vote to the candidate Sven Kohler-Metzler from the same party. So here you have an example of accumulating, so giving 2 votes to single candidates, which means that the candidate Kohler-Metzler will receive 2 votes from this particular voter. And in place of the candidate Željko Vuksanović, this voter wrote the name of Dominik Lamprecht, who is from a different political party. I don't remember now which one it is, but it doesn't matter. Just you have this is a nice example to see how these various options are used by this particular voter. So the negative preferential vote, positive preferential vote for somebody who is already on this on the list of this party, and a positive preferential vote for somebody who is whose name is on a different party list. I'm not sure how can I make this disappear. I hope this doesn't disturb you. So what did we do in our research? Well, first of all, we classified all candidates running in the elections. We had two studies, federal and local study. So we classified them into, first of all, two broad categories: candidates with, let's say, typical Swiss names. When I say names, I mean family names or surnames, and those who have non-Swiss surnames. According to an online free database that contains all surnames of all Swiss citizens until 1962, we decided to take the year 1940. The beginning of the Second World War as the kind of year of reference, meaning that all surnames that, according to this database, were listed as Swiss before 1940, we considered them as Swiss, and all other we considered them as non-Swiss. We did some additional robustness checks to see whether or not our approach really allows us to say that a given candidate has or doesn't have a migration background. So we concretely we sent an email, a kind of small survey to all candidates who, according to our method, had non-Swiss names. So all candidates in the 2015 elections, federal elections, meaning approximately 500 candidates. And then we took additional 500 randomly selected candidates with Swiss names. So they also received this survey. And according to response rate was not great. It was about 22%, I think, but still. And so we found out that indeed at least 60% of people classified by us as having non-Swiss names. 60% of these candidates had truly had a migration background according to the official definition of migration background. An additional, I think, 27 or something percent would not qualify as themselves as having migration background, but typically their parents would have a migration background. So we thought that it is robust enough for our purposes. And on the other side, among the candidates with Swiss names, only 8% were actually had a migration background that we were not able to identify simply by their family name. So yeah, all in all, we think that our approach is sufficiently robust for our purposes. And perhaps one thing not to forget is that we are interested at this electoral discrimination that we can see on the basis of names that appear on the ballot, because of course we cannot know to what extent the given voter actually knows something about this the given candidate. In other words, even though you might have candidates who have a typically Swiss family name, but actually they have a migration background. Think, for instance, of somebody called Müller, which could be also from Austria or from Germany. But if this originally German or originally Austrian, a typical Swiss voter would not know that on the basis of his name Thomas Müller, because Thomas Müller can be perfectly Swiss as well. So even though in reality this Thomas Müller has a migration background, it is not so relevant for our purposes if we say, or if we want to inquire the extent of discrimination against people that voters consider on the basis of what they read on the ballot, or they consider, or they presume that this or that candidate has or doesn't have a typically Swiss name. So we did two studies, as I said, the Swiss federal elections 2015, and I will present mainly the results from that study during this talk. But there was a pilot study before that, in which we focused on local elections in 6 municipalities of the canton of Zurich. So our hypotheses are that voters discriminate against candidates with a migration background relative to majority candidates. And the second hypothesis is that voters discriminate in favor of majority candidates relative to candidates with a migration background. These two hypotheses are important because both can have or can penalize, so to say, can be discriminatory, or can lessen the chances of candidates to be elected. So it's not only if you are against candidates with a migration background that you produce that effect. It's also if you have a tendency simply to favor those who are like yourself. In our case, you don't necessarily need to cross off names that you think are have a migration background. You can simply, so to say, have a preference for people who are like yourself, but the end result will still be potentially discriminatory for those belonging to minority groups, and in our studies, people with migration background. So our explanatory variable is candidates' surnames. Dependent variables are positive and negative preference votes, enabling us to explore the two hypotheses, the voting against or voting in favor. We have a number of control variables, both at the candidate level, characteristics of candidates, but also at the list level. And especially important is the question whether or not the party list is leftist or centrist or right parties from the right. And then we also conducted a number of robustness checks. I won't go into details now, but I'm happy to explore that more in Q&A. Of course, if you have read the paper, you will know more about that already at this stage. So this is a little bit of descriptive figures. Here you have candidates separated between candidates with Swiss names and those with non-Swiss names, and separated by the canton. So most cantons allowed us to have access to data. Only one kind of major canton refused to do that, Canton of Aargau. And of course, we did not include the small cantons who have only one seat in the in the first chamber of the Swiss Parliament. It's of course a detail that I forgot to mention. The elections concerned the first chamber of the Parliament, the so-called National Council, elected by proportional representation, and not the second chamber. But of course, even in the first chamber, you have a number of cantons, 6 small cantons, who have only 1 representative in the National Council. And so, of course, with 1 representative, the electoral system is a majoritarian one and not proportional representation as in all other cantons. So here you see the elected representatives that, if you take the example of Canton of Zurich, you had we had 14.3% of candidates had non-Swiss names, but among those who were elected from the Canton of Zurich, which is the biggest Swiss canton, 8.6% had non-Swiss names. Again, this is another table with some description. As you see, we also did an additional coding of the non-Swiss names into different categories of non-Swiss names. And especially we put in the one box, so to say, all names that are Western European or Nordic, Scandinavian countries or from Anglophone countries. And then we did some more distinctions among non-Western, non-Swiss names, as you can see. And the reason is that there are studies, other studies in Switzerland, not on elections, but actually on naturalization procedures, because in some, until the 2003, 2004, in some Swiss municipalities, I think exclusively in German-speaking Switzerland, in order to receive Swiss citizenship, there was a popular vote in your municipality, so people could vote whether or not to give you, allow you to become Swiss citizen. And a major study on that showed that Swiss voters tended to, or at least in some of these municipalities, to be more discriminatory against candidates from non-Western countries, especially Turkey or former Yugoslavia, and much less so towards candidates from Western countries. So this was the reason why we wanted to, try to make also this distinction about Western and non-Western non-Swiss names. And here are our main results. So this table focuses on negative preference votes. And here you can see that having a non-Swiss name, if you control for all other possible controls you can see, you do have a small but statistically significant effect. So it is true, according to our study, that having a non-Swiss name does mean that you tend to be more often crossed off by voters. And this is especially the case if you as a candidate run on the for the parties from the right. So in the Swiss system, we consider as the right, the FDP is the similar to FDP in Germany, and Swiss People's Party, the main right-wing nationalist party and the major Swiss party in relative terms. So the interactions here between I'm really sorry about this bar here, and I'm not sure how can I mask it. I don't want to make some mess now, so yes, so the interaction here is we took as a reference a right-wing party. So as you can see, being from the center or leftist party does not have such a negative effect as from the being a candidate for one of the two parties of the right. You can see here better what I have in mind. So here again, we speak about negative preference votes, and having a non-Swiss names is clearly a disadvantage if you run for one of the two parties of the right. Much less so, but still from the parties of the center parties, and we don't find a statistical significance if we focus on the leftist parties. So it is not cannot be said that it's a disadvantage to have a non-Swiss names if you run for the leftist parties. So it's not a surprise, but we have some evidence here. This is the table on focusing on positive preference votes. Here again, even it's a little bit statistically a little bit less significant, but still it is significant. Having a non-Swiss names means that you receive less positive preference votes from voters. Here, the situation is a little bit more blurred if we focus on the party list on which you run. But still, you do see a tendency, again, less clear than in the previous figure, but still, that having a non-Swiss name and running on the rightist party means that you receive tend to receive a less positive preference votes if compared to the centrist parties and on the leftist party. Again, leftist party, there are some candidates who actually receive a little bit more positive preference votes if they have a non-Swiss name, but again, this also cannot be generalizable because there are others who also receive less, being candidates with non-Swiss names. But to make a long story short, the effects of electoral discrimination, both in terms of negative and positive preference votes, are stronger if we focus on parties from the right. Interestingly, we do not see, or the idea that having a non-Swiss name that is non-Western is a bigger disadvantage than having a non-Swiss name that is Western. We don't see here facts, neither on if we focus on negative preference votes, nor if we focus on positive preference votes. But here I should say that here we have statistically significant results, less so if we focus on positive preference votes. But again, this is an interesting finding that's actually confirmed also by our previous study on Zurich municipal elections. I will show you a figure on that in a minute. As I said, we conducted also a number of robustness checks and additional context studies, but just one example showing that we distinguish municipalities according to the percentage of naturalized population they have. So it's a little bit kind of proxy to know about ethnic diversity, so to say, within a given a municipality and within those who have voting rights. So here you have predicted negative preference votes, showing that having a non-Swiss name is potentially a disadvantage for candidates, especially in those municipalities with a lower percentage of naturalized Swiss citizens, or let's say with less ethnic diversity. So more diversity you have in a municipality, this effect becomes less pronounced, and something similar can be said also if you focus on positive preference votes. So in municipalities that are less ethnically diverse, candidates with non-Swiss names receive or tend to receive less positive preference votes. So again, I mentioned that we also conducted this a pilot study that is by many aspects similar, with the difference that at that point we were interested more on these negative preference votes, cross-offs. And actually, that was one of the things that we learned from that study, that we should go more into detail about, also with the focus on positive preference votes, because this in-group favoritism can be as disadvantageous for minority candidates as the hostility bias, that's the outgroup hostility that they may face. But still, the results are similar if we focus this a little bit on a different kind of figure. But the having a non-Swiss name in municipal elections in Zurich, according to our model number 3, where we control for different variables, again, we see a small but still significant effect that these candidates do receive more negative preference votes than candidates having Swiss names. Again, here, similar finding, we don't see an effect if we focus on the distinction between Western and non-Western, non-Swiss names. Here we conducted also some kind of check. We wanted to see whether the effect is stronger in more conservative municipalities. So this is a little bit different from what we did with this ethnic diversity, where we looked on naturalized percentage of naturalized citizens. Here we actually looked at how these different municipalities in the canton of Zurich voted in referendums or popular initiatives, so in direct democratic votes, as we call them, on immigration issues. So as you know, in Switzerland, there are a lot of referendums. Some of them do concern immigration. So according to the results from these municipalities, we were able to place the municipalities on a scale to distinguish them between more liberal and more conservative. And you do see that having, again, not a surprise, but still having a non-Swiss name is more a disadvantage if you are in a more conservative municipality, and it is less so, or much less so, in liberal municipalities. So let me conclude. Yes, I still have 5 minutes, but perhaps I don't need 5 minutes. Yes, first, indeed, according to the results of our study, having a foreign-sounding surname in the Swiss context is a potential obstacle for electoral success, because all other things equal, you do tend to receive more negative preference votes. So that could, result of that could be a result of this outgroup hostility as a hypothesis. And you tend to receive less positive preference votes, which would typically result from in-group favoritism. Both are statistically significant, and they might explain, at least to a certain extent, again, it is more complicated to explain why do we have underrepresentation of people with migrant background in parliaments. But this is, we believe, one aspect of this explanation. Of course, the other two important aspects is to look at the how many, what is the share of people with migration background who are actually interested or would like to run in elections for a given party. And then a second aspect is, what happens within the parties? Do they receive equal chances? Are they promoted rather than blocked, etc., etc.? But let's say once that all these things are, all these potential obstacles are over, so you are able to be candidate, you are on the party list, voila, they are still voters, and voters decide. And that was the focus of our study. There can be more can be said about more, let's say, theoretical puzzle that was included, I think, in the title of my presentation on your website. I didn't have time to explore that. It's also something that is work in progress with my colleague from Geneva, Emanuela Ceva, who is a political theorist. This is here more a question about to what extent can we expect voters, or can we hold them accountable for what they do as voters, or should we simply say they are free to do whatever they want because that's democracy? This is more a theoretical puzzle. We kind of reach a conclusion that from democratic theory perspective, etc., it's you cannot really of course you cannot hold them accountable. Freedom of choice is important also for voters, but still this does not mean that nothing can be done or should be done against or trying to prevent or minimize these discriminatory behavior. So a lot depends, of course, on institutional design, especially electoral system design. We can discuss this later on if you prefer, but of course, one thing is that, again, it is a peculiarity of the Swiss electoral system that allows voters to cross off names. But you can have a proportional representation system without this possibility, as it does happen in most cases where, actually, in all, as far as I'm aware, in all countries, at least at the national level, where you have list PR, we were able to find only two places where it seems that these crossing off is possible. It is in Germany, in certain local elections in Germany, not national, local, and in one of the Baltic countries, if I'm correct, Estonia. And if I'm correct, only for elections to European Parliament, but to the best of our knowledge, not at the national level in any democracy that people have the possibility to cross off names from the ballot. So I think on this I would conclude, having consumed 43 minutes of my presentation, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Nenad. So we will open the Q&A. I see Mariana already has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Nenad. It was super interesting. I really enjoyed the talk, and the results are pretty striking. So I have a few clarification questions and one substantive. The clarification question is, what are the exact electoral consequences of voters crossing off? Can you hear me? Yeah. What are the electoral?
I was just not sure. You said what consequences?
The electoral consequences when voters are crossing off candidates. So what does it mean substantively? Do they go? How much does their chance of ending up winning the elections decreases when they're crossed off? What happens substantively? Right? It's like they're not they drop down to the list, or what exactly is happening? I wasn't sure what this means exactly. And then I was also wondering, we saw some substantive results in terms of the predicted, like the prediction when you have a Swiss name and non-Swiss name. But I was wondering about the substantive effect. How much discrimination exactly do you find? So what do these coefficients exactly mean in terms of probability of being crossed out, or probability of being chosen, in terms of how much probability do people or how much does the likelihood of being chosen or being crossed off increases or decreases with having a non-Swiss name? This is like two clarification questions. And in general, I was wondering theoretically, why do people do this? Is there, and I think this relates to the question, what should be done? I guess we need to understand why this discrimination happens. Is it because they think that those with minority background are less competent to represent their local interest, or is it just plain hostility towards groups that they are not very familiar with or have some prejudices about? Like those are the things I was wondering. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Well, your first question is very interesting, and we did try many in many ways to make this, let's say, apart from the analysis that I presented about statistical significance of having a non-Swiss name and controlling for all other possible factors, like, of course, if you are, for just one example, because I see also it's in the chat, what does mean bisher? Bisher means incumbent. So of course, if you are incumbent, a candidate, even though if you have a non-Swiss name, meaning that at some point in your career you were able to be elected, of course it is an advantage as for any incumbent. So this is something you have to control, or you have to control for the position on the list, because in most cantons, not all, but in most cantons, the parties put on higher positions on the list. Well, they start with incumbents, and then a kind of candidate they prefer, for many reasons the party would like to push forward, and they end the list with candidates who basically have no chance of getting elected. So you have to control for that, because of course, if you are a candidate with a non-Swiss name being on the bottom of the list, you have no chances, but also people with Swiss names have no chances on the bottom of the list. So again, but so again, we controlling for all this, we see there is a statistically very significant effect, a negative effect of both if we focus on negative and on positive preference votes. Now, your question was, but concretely, how many positions on the list you lose or win? So I mean, if you suppose that, let's suppose that no voter would modify the ballot, meaning they just simply put the ballot as it is of a given party, let's say Social Democratic Party, to use the example I presented the ballot, and let's say out of 20 candidates, 5 people, this party obtains 5 seats. Of course, the 5 people who are top on the list will be elected. But given that about half of the electorate does modify lists, of course, there can be changes. So somebody who is on the position 7 can be in the end number 4 and be elected. On this, so it is technically far from obvious to do this for many reasons. But in the we try to make an estimation in the, at least in the municipal elections. That's what I have now in mind, and I think, but I need to check. I think that we found that approximately the candidates with non-Swiss names lost on average something like 2.2 positions in terms of where their initial position was. But I should check what exactly was the number, but I think 2.2 or 2.3, something like that. But again, it's a rather technically difficult to make this estimation. The question, well, the second question I think I answered, because it's not simply predicted values. There was some figures where we use the expression predicted when I was saying presenting this figure on ethnic composition, but actually we were what I presented as statistical analysis are the results of the of true elections, true ballots, true we really examined each and every ballot that we could obtain and checked our hypothesis on the basis of the real results. Of course, the big disadvantage of a study like ours is precisely what you have been asking. So what are the reasons why somebody would cross off names having a certain origin? Of course, we cannot know that because ballots are anonymous, and we can have suppositions. We can try to get closer to it precisely by looking at the composition of a given electoral district or municipality. Is it more conservative, more liberal, or checking for the political party? Of course, that's something that we did. But going deeper is a different study, and we can have many hypotheses on that, but it would be a different study.
Thank you.
Zsolt was second, maybe.
Yes, thank you. And so congratulations on this well executed and very important research with very clear results. To some extent, your issue here is that your findings have confirmed most of our stereotypes about this rural, xenophobic, right-wing Swiss, and so on. So I wonder how, I think one question is how to make it more kind of puzzling or interesting, the findings. And I would dig perhaps a bit deeper into this issue of diversity. Why is it so that in diverse places this discrimination occurs less? At one level, it's very obvious. Why is it so? They are more used to foreigners and so on. They have more cosmopolitan orientation, more liberal, and so on. But this could be presented as something relatively surprising, particularly coming from a kind of realistic group conflict theory, where you would expect conflict to be present exactly where there is somebody to fight against. And this is exactly in those settlements where you have foreigners in large number, and not in the rural districts where there are almost none. So it is surprising if you look from that angle. And one also wonders what happens in kind of settlements which are, let's say, very rural, but there is a large percentage of foreigners. So how these different factors play out against each other. So you may want to select some of those cantons or districts where that is can be illustrated. Then another way to make it maybe interesting is to have a kind of long-term historical perspective on these issues. One such lesson that we have from history is that if foreigners have to face this kind of discrimination, they change their name. This is what historically happened in many settings. So it would be interesting to know whether in Switzerland they changed their name, and if not, then maybe that's a sign that actually the discrimination is not as extreme. Ironically, if you were a Jew in a country like Hungary in the 19th century, you probably were called Grün or Gross or Roth or something like that, Klein. And then those people changed their name into proper Hungarian name. Had they not done so, they would have better chance now running in a Swiss election. So they are, those original names would have made them easier for them to assimilate into Swiss context. And also, normatively speaking, there are interesting ways of looking at this. One could be that actually this discrimination is part of a kind of a deal that exists between the local population and the decision makers, in the sense that having more than 1/5 of your population being foreign-born is extreme. So one wonders, how come that the Swiss society can survive this influx of foreigners without major conflicts? And maybe the answer to this is that the Swiss know that the foreign influence is filtered. There are many filters. And one of the filters assures that the number of foreigners in the country will not mean a corresponding large number of foreigners in the parliament, in the government, and so on. So because there are these breaks built in, there are these filters, therefore the Swiss are able to assimilate and absorb so many foreigners. So it is part of a large social contract, which is obviously not explicit and not conscious, but it may happen in the background. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for your comments and questions. I don't think I can address them all. I mean, many of them were also comments, but let me try to focus on a couple of them. Starting by the last. Why there is not a major conflict? Well, this is actually a very, very interesting question, and you can also say, apart from, forget immigrants, even the Switzerland as itself with different language groups and Protestant, Catholic religion, etc., how it was, how did it make it? And I don't have time to go too much into details, but if you are interested, I do have some publications on the role of direct democracy that might surprise you, but I have some hypothesis that the frequent use of referendums is something that is not something that goes against minorities, linguistic minorities in Switzerland, but to the contrary, it makes this feeling of belonging to single political nations stronger. Again, I have some publications on this, and there are some people who would advance similar hypothesis in terms of immigrant population, coupled with federalism and decentralized system. Is that interestingly, you cannot find in Switzerland the kind of ghetto and parallel world situations that you do find in some Western democracies when you think of immigrant population. So I think the answer to this puzzle is less what you are saying, that there's some kind of filter so that they don't go into parliament, etc. It's much more about spatial, social care, cantonal, federalism, etc., but it would be a topic of a different study and of a different talk. About the name change, this is currently very marginal phenomenon. So most people keep their names. And actually, our study was done in 2015 elections, but already 2019 elections, you got some more people with clearly foreign names entering the parliament, like Mustafa Atici comes to my mind, of Kurdish origin from Turkey, etc. But there is one. Let me just share a screen just for a second. This lady here, Yvette Esterman, she's a member of parliament from Swiss People's Party, so from the right-wing party, elected in 2007. But her true name is Iveta Gavlasova, or Gavlashova, I'm not sure. So she's from Bratislava. And she became, Swiss through marriage with a certain Esterman. But she did change her Iveta first name into Yvette, which sounds a little bit more, French, but still more Swiss than Iveta. And you do have this example. So typically, this Yvette Esterman, according to our coding, would not result, as somebody having a migrant background because she has a Swiss name. So you do have examples of name changing, but they are really marginal. I couldn't think of any other Swiss politician who changed a foreign-sounding name into a Swiss name or first name to be elected. And then briefly on the puzzle about why people in municipalities that are more ethnically homogeneous, let's say, tend to be more against candidates with foreign names. Well, this is again a big debate in the literature. There is this contact hypothesis and the other hypothesis and empirical studies go a little bit in two directions. So sometimes living together can be a source of tensions, but sometimes living together goes into different directions. So I don't have a final answer to this because, again, I think this is a very disputed question also in the literature. Perhaps some people in the room have more examples on that. Of course, there's also not to underestimate something that we cannot, with our empirical data, we cannot check, which is it could be that in certain areas where you do have a lot of or above average share of population with foreign background and who have Swiss citizenship, you might have also some kind of discrimination from the other perspective, meaning that people of Kurdish origin in the canton of Basel City would go and vote only for Mr. Mustafa Atici and cross off all other names because they want Mr. Mustafa Atici to be elected. And so as an end result, in our study, we would have, all of a sudden there are people with non-Swiss names who do get a lot of positive preference votes, etc. But again, we are not able with our data to go deeper into that question.
Matthias?
Carsten, were you first?
I don't remember. Sorry.
I can
Whichever.
be brief. I can because both Marianne and Jolt have both preempted my praise and also critical question. The praise is it's clear and also good presentation. I thank you for this. The criticism I understand is that the fact that there is discrimination is not surprising. What would be more sort of informative is how strong it is, and if maybe there is variation across cantons but there you explained us that you cannot really deliver this. But this would be, I think, a great asset if you could. I have one minor question. You did say at one point that the positive preference voting showed no difference between Western sounding and non-Western sounding names. But in the table, it clearly showed that one was significant and the other is not. And surprisingly, it was significant if you had a Western sounding name that it mattered, but not if you had a non-Western sounding. And since you always only focused on statistical significance, I wondered why on this occasion you sort of glossed over that.
Yeah, thanks. I think you're absolutely right. I think I glossed over because while I was presenting I couldn't see because of this thing and on the Zoom where with the chat options, etc. But you are true. There are well, I presented two figures on Western, non-Western, on negative preference field, because from the Zurich study and from the Swiss national study, and then additionally from the Swiss national study there was also the table with the positive preference votes, distinguishing between non-Western and Western, and indeed in that case there was no significance for non-Western. You're absolutely right. I should check. Exactly, but the very probably the explanation is that among the candidates with non-Swiss and non-Western names, there are so few that you don't see the difference because there are so few. Yes, that's actually, I think, the explanation. But you're right that I glossed over that. I'm sorry about this initially.
Now, Mathis.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to save the honor of Swiss voters, or rather, maybe not voters, but parties, especially those on the right, because while you were presenting, I went online to see how the Dutch right is doing. Yeah, and I looked at the candidate lists for the of the PVV and Forum for Democratie, so two right-wing parties, extreme right parties, who did very well in the recent Dutch elections. Both submitted 50 names, very optimistic, and none of these names is foreign, except maybe somebody on Geert Wilders' list who was born in Tel Aviv, Israel. But actually that fits very well with the pro-Israel stance of Geert Wilders. So, you know, you couldn't do this kind of study that you did in the Netherlands because, well, apart from the electoral system, there are simply no candidates with a foreign, especially non-Western background on the lists of the Dutch right. So my point would be, what on earth is the Swiss right thinking, having somebody like Ali Hassan on their list? I mean, that's not what your clientele is looking for, obviously. Yeah. Okay. Now a more serious point, gender. You could easily, I think, replicate your research design for gender, right? Maybe you're already doing that. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthijs. Yes, we are doing that actually. Yes, it's one of these things that is work in progress because we have an additional third author on that, and so yes, it is definitely something that is worth exploring because our data from both studies show that there is no significant effect, neither positive nor negative, if our focus is not immigrant origin minorities, but women. So we, according to our data, we cannot say that the underrepresentation of women, descriptive underrepresentation, is due to electoral discrimination, at least not in Switzerland. I mean, just to mention, currently the women representation in the National Council is actually quite high, 42%, quite high in international comparison. So but it used to be, of course, lower, and it is still relatively low in the second chamber. But again, second chamber is elected by different rules. Yes. The first question, it is very interesting, and it is a dilemma that right-wing parties face. There's a researcher from Princeton, Rafaela Danziger. Somebody perhaps know her. She also conducted many interesting studies on, especially focusing on Muslim minorities. I think she did a study in Germany, Belgium, the UK, or Scandinavia as well. And she published a book about immigrants in politics, etc. And one of the things she does address is this dilemma that right-wing parties face, because on the one hand, of course, as any party, you want to have more support, and you know that there are all these potential voters coming from immigrant communities that, according to most studies, tend to vote less in elections than typically Swiss or German or whatever Dutch voters. So the turnout rate are, generally speaking, lower among people with immigration background. So there's a large potential for all parties, and yes, one can observe also in other countries that there are parties also from the right. Perhaps not the Dutch right in the Netherlands, but in Germany you can see that. In France, even Front National, Rassemblement National has become a little bit more open in order to attract votes coming from these communities. But of course, they know that if they want people of Turkish origin to vote for you, well, you need to in a way have at least some candidates from of this origin. So this is a dilemma, and in the Swiss context, the Swiss People's Party actually is in recent years is even promoting. They even have in some cantons like a whole section of Swiss People Party supporters with immigrant background. But again, the dilemma, yes, I didn't say something about the other end of the dilemma. The dilemma is that if you have, of course, too many candidates who are clearly of immigrant origin, the effect can be that you lose some of your core voters who So you need to balance the two things, and in the Swiss context, the balance is actually. Or dilemma is easier to solve, because the party, the right-wing party, can say, okay, let us have some of these people on our list, and so we can attract votes from these communities. But in the end, our majority voters will cross them off anyway. So I don't know, if this is kind of a strategy that they have, but I do not exclude it, at least at this point.
I also wanted to ask a question. I also like the paper a lot, and I thought when you showed these ballots, it seemed like some of the names also had like professions there and like addresses. Is this possible, or just? And so I guess my question is that there is this distinction in the literature on discrimination between taste-based and statistical discrimination, and with the idea being that like if you're in a very low information environment, then maybe you update your beliefs about like a candidate or someone applying for a job or whatnot. Like you just take the cues that are available to you and update on more relevant things, like like how good these people are in politics, how educated they are, what kind of experience they have, and so on. And so my question is, like, do you have any way of teasing these apart? So would it be possible, for instance, that someone who, like people would just assume that someone with like a Slavic name or like a Turkish name are just less likely to have a college degree or something. And it would be just nice to maybe have like other biographical features of this to tease this out. I know. I mean, it's interesting that there are these papers by like Jans Heinmuller have these papers on these immigration referenda, and I think with his papers there is also kind of demographic information about these people who apply for citizenship. So it seems to be the case that even net of these differences, these like country of origin seems to matter, but I'm not sure if you can rule this out here.
Thank you. It's a great question. Actually, we did inquire a little bit about profession. So you're right. On the ballot that you saw, you can see actually the address of the candidate. So if we had a situation with like a city with a kind of a ghetto of one part of the city where mostly immigrants live, that might be an additional queue for voters. So not only, you see Željko Vuksanović, but on top of it, you see he lives in the ghetto, and his profession is some kind of supposed low-skilled profession. So in other words, if this Željko Vuksanović were a university professor to live in a rich neighborhood, perhaps the effect, discriminatory effect upon him would be less important. Well, the first thing is something that we cannot check, or we did not check, because the at least in that given municipalities, there's not really a ghetto situation. As I said, this is relatively. I mean, I don't say that it doesn't exist at all. I mean, there are some cities where you can say, well, there are some parts of the city where there are more immigrants, but it's not really a situation compared to some French or Swedish suburbs, etc. But the other thing, profession is something that we did check. Let me just share a screen for a second. So yes, we could not include in our study on national election. We could not include profession in our models, because not in every canton the profession of the candidate is indicated. So this is also something that, even though the elections are national, cantons and the parties in different cantons do have some freedom to, for instance, to indicate a profession or not. But we did check and this made a distinction between high, medium, and low skilled occupations, and we controlled for that in the cantons where the profession was indicated. And as you can read here, our findings are still robust, even if we do control for profession. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, can I just follow up on this? So just 1 second. So I think that what would be interesting is either to compare your effects across these cantons that require these professions or not, to get at that mechanism, or I think what would be more informative than just controlling for the, what is it, like the status of the profession, or like like blue collar, white collar, and so on, instead to like re-estimate the effect of the foreign name, like within groups.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean.
It wouldn't be the exact same thing as to just control for it.
Yeah,
because that would be interesting. That, you know, like if you are, you know, like if you have a Slavic name but you're a university professor, are you still discriminated against another, you know, like a Swiss university professor? That would be like somewhat different. I don't know. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that
just a short. It's a pity that my co-author Lea Portman is not here because I don't remember anymore. But I think that we even made, because we really did a lot of possible checks possible. You know, every possible comment that we received during the conference, we checked. So we might have checked for what you are asking, but I'm not sure anymore, and I'm sorry. But anyway, it's a great suggestion that if we haven't done it, we should do it. Thanks.
And Daniel has a question.
Thanks for the opportunity. You know, Nenad, you presented primarily the empirical part of the argument, but we know that you are also a political theorist, and we know that you are or used to be a member of the Swiss government commission to fight against racism. So I would love to continue from the point which Gabor has brought up, and a few points which go, in this particular direction, hear more from you. In my understanding, discrimination, and this paper is supposedly about discrimination. Discrimination is about the non-equal treatment of things which should be equal. Now, you have mentioned, in the paper many times that you use these names as cues for migration identity. Whereas Gabor has alluded that these might be cues for competence. But names and identities are also cues for something else, for what an MP will specialize in, what issues he or she will represent. It's a cue for their position. And if I'm an ecologically oriented voter and I do have the position, the professions available of a candidate, I'll probably not vote for a car producer or for somebody who works in a weapons factory. And if I have the names on the ballot and I don't think that migration issues should get an emphasis, in the political representation, I will simply, not vote for somebody who has a migration background if that is the best expectation which I can have. So I'm not sure whether this is discrimination or just a job of a voter based on the available information to get the best possible choice. And identities in the representative process are simply not, only a matter of identity itself, but they also can, speak to us about what we expect from an MP to do, because if not, we would need to have women, young people, migrant, elderly people in parliament, if not that we expect them to emphasize certain issues. So that's not, I don't see why this is discrimination.
Thanks, Daniel. That's a really great question. Looking at the time, we would need a whole seminar only on the concept of discrimination, because it is one of those things that we think we know what it is, but actually in the literature, the interesting discussions about different approaches and trying to understand what discrimination is about. These studies are only coming up since 2010. Kasper Lippert Rasmussen is one of the names here to look at, a Danish political philosopher, and he also published I think Routledge handbook on the ethics of discrimination with all these. So there are so many different definitions of what discrimination is. And some of them are based on the concept of equality that you said, like it can be only if you can be harmed only if you compare somebody with all equal to you, and you say the thing that made discrimination harmful is one thing that distinguishes us whether gender or ethnicity or whatever. But the others are more, they think discrimination concept should not be comparative. So you can be discriminated without necessarily being compared to somebody else. But really, it's not. I don't have time now to go. Let's have another seminar on that. But just to say that, you know, in the context and with the data that we had, we really tried to control for as much possible factors that we could, at least those that were visible on the ballot or can be deduced from the ballot, like position list, incumbency, etc., etc. Of course, one important control is that you do control for political party, because at least for negative preference votes, you can, again, cross off only people from your party. So this is already something important. But we found some interesting things that perhaps go a little bit in the direction that you have in mind, like byproducts of our study. We found, for instance, that voters of the Swiss People's Party tend to be quite discriminatory against or in favor candidates on their party list in terms of their profession, whether or not it is written that the candidate is a Bauer, somebody, how do you say Bauer in English? He works in the agriculture. So there are some Swiss candidates and voters who actually stress this a lot, you know, I am a Bauer. But others, also from the SVP, Swiss People's Party, stress that they are Unternehmer, that they are entrepreneurs, so businessmen. And we find that there are voters who tend to cross off for or against both directions. But again, the concept of discrimination would say that we should apply it only to categories that are socially salient in a society. So being a businessman or a Bauer, it's a matter of debate, but I wouldn't say that is as socially salient distinction as it is skin color, gender, or migration background.
Can I have a very short follow-up? I mean, I want to insist on the point, why do we want to have descriptive representation, in parliaments? If, I want to have women representation not because of the group picture. I want to have it for the advancement of women's rights in society. And the same way, I don't want to have migrant representation in politics because of, the group picture. But I want to have it for the substantive, policies which go along. But if me as a voter, I don't want it, I should vote against all women and I should vote against all migrants. And that's the descriptive representation goes along with, with the issues which are connected to it. And from this perspective, I don't see why you take it as part of the democratic game. Some people get elected.
As part of the democratic
game that some people are elected and others not.
Yes, well, this is the debate on descriptive and substantial representation that has its merits on its own. It is we did start with some kind of assumption. Okay. And I did use the term descriptive for purpose, because we said, okay, there are many studies and discussions saying that descriptive underrepresentation of certain groups is a problem in democracy. And then we saw why, how does it happen? Does electoral discrimination helps to explain this under descriptive representation, et cetera, et cetera. But then the whole debate, it's true, we didn't discuss it a lot about, well, what is so important about descriptive representation? Why should be important? Perhaps it's not. Yeah. So this is a legitimate a question, and as you're aware, that was the topic of my PhD thesis on quota, so I could speak a lot about that. But in the end, to make the long story short, a long dissertation short, I said, well, from a perspective of point of view of democratic theory, what should count is really this substantial representation, whether or not given interests are represented or not, independently on the external characteristics of the MP who votes in favor or against certain policies. But at the same time, the idea is that if you do see in a let's say ethnically diverse society that only one ethnic group is represented in parliament, even though they are all nice and they do policies for ethnic minorities, etc., there is still some symbolic, actually there is a concept also of symbolic representation that comes into discussion, and that can be seen as something that we would like to have in order to have an idea that we live in a democracy where everybody has equal chances, etc., etc. So I even start, if you remember, my dissertation with the hypothetical, precisely of this kind, hypothetical country with different groups, etc., but only one is in parliament. And they're very nice and very fine. And what's the problem? What is the problem? So there's also the concept of reconnaissance. What's the name of reconnaissance? Recognition as a philosophical concept, that if you don't see nobody who is like you yourself in parliament, there is something wrong, etc., etc. I see there are a couple of other hands raised. If we want to address them in 10 minutes, I think we have.
Mariana was next.
I think Zsolt was before me. I don't know whether it's an old or new hand.
Maybe Zsolt's hand is old.
Okay, good. Then go ahead. I just have a short follow-up on what Gabor said, or related to it, actually. And I was thinking that practically what Gabor suggested is to kind of do an interaction between profession and having a Swiss or non-Swiss name, right? And I think this would give you an opportunity to dig deeper in terms of what the voters are doing, or why are they discriminating against non-Swiss names or candidates with non-Swiss names. Because if it is about getting more information and upgrading, you don't have enough information in the beginning, you kind of assume or have some prejudices about the competence or the reliability of a person judging by his or her name, right? This is like the first thing you see, the name, and then you already have a concept in terms of how competent and how reliable this person is. And if this discrimination is about this particular information gathering, like you discriminate because you think this person is incompetent or unreliable, then this interaction with the occupation would show you whether this is the case, because it is possible that once people see additional information from the occupation, maybe some occupations are very clearly signal that this person is reliable, or very clearly signal, or sometimes a given occupation might be blurring this signal. For example, entrepreneurs is a cool thing, but then you don't know whether you can rely on this person or not. And maybe some professions, like, I don't know, somebody in the education system or professor or whatever might be signaling something, might provide a clearer signal. I don't know, it's like an interpretation thing. But what I'm saying is, it is possible that they upgrade, and then they would, if they see that somebody has like a university education or has a profession which requires university education, they might discriminate less against this person despite of the non-Swiss name, which would mean that they in the beginning are discriminating because of this incompetence or unreliability reason, and not because they hate this person because of his or her origin, right? So it's a one thing just to be hostile against a group because you have these prejudices. It's another thing to think from prior or previous information for some prejudices that this person is incompetent, but then upgrade with additional information and kind of not discriminate as much because you know this person has higher education or is a professor or whatever, right? Different, like works in the banking sector and so on. So you kind of, you know what I mean? It's like, I think you can go deeper in terms of why people discriminate. Is it just hostility? Even if it is just hostility, then this upgrading probably would not happen as much. Or occupation wouldn't condition the effect of non-Swiss names on voting for somebody or selecting somebody or not. Because if you just hate somebody, it doesn't matter what this person's profession is. But if you, it is about competence, then you would downgrade the ethnicity or the minority status of this person.
Yes, but again, we did check for. I mean, we did not. I don't remember anymore. I have to ask Lea Portman if we checked between cantons where profession is indicated and those that don't indicate profession on the ballot. I really can't remember if we did that check, but I would be surprised if at least Lea at some point hasn't tried to check. But here there is one table that is from our study on municipal elections, where not only we looked at, generally speaking, whether profession, again, we did a distinction between high skilled, medium skilled, low skilled. And here the reference is high skilled, meaning that if you are medium skilled, you do receive a little bit more, these are negative, negative preference votes than compared to high skilled. So again, comparison is reference is high skilled. You do receive more 0.1, and it is a very statistically significant if you are medium skilled, and even more so if you are low skilled. So there is definitely, the chances to be elected are greater if you are high skilled, or let's say if you are high skilled, the chances are lower that you receive negative preference, or that you are crossed off. Okay, so in other terms, voters prefer high skilled.
But this is only for Swiss names, right? Because
wait.
On the bottom.
But we did try to check interaction with non-Swiss names here. You see, unfortunately, we don't find the results that are statistically significant. That's what I so. But I mean, we did try, but here we don't have statistical significance.
But I think even this result is already telling a lot. Then it's not about updating. At least you cannot find evidence for updating there, right? Which is striking. Which means that it might be a sign of basically being antagonistic against this group, or not liking this group, and you don't upgrade even if you know about their skills, which is, I think this is an interesting finding. You don't have a significant interaction, but I think the interpretation is interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is worth exploring further. And thanks for the question. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we need to wrap up at this point because the slot is over, but thanks a lot for this interesting talk. And I think it was a good conversation for sure.
Thanks. I also enjoyed replying to. I hope that I tried to address all your questions. I'm sorry if some things are missing. And thanks. Really, the questions were great, and the conversation was great. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. It was really nice having you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.